Okay, welcome to Active Reading.
Hey, what's up everybody? It's Thomas from College Info Geek, and you ever just wonder how are you gonna get all the information of these crazy huge reading assignments in a freaking weekend? I want to share a quote with you that I learned over the weekend while doing research for this video, and it goes like this. The mark of a successful college student is the mastery of knowing not only what to study, but also how to study it. And this applies to your readings as much as it applies to anything else in college. So in last week's video, I went over some strategies that you can use to figure out whether or not you actually need to do a reading assignment at all. Now in this video, I want to start focusing on how you should actually tackle the reading assignments that you do need to do. And I have three main goals that I want you to keep in mind here. Number one, you want to learn the right information from your readings. Obviously, you can't learn every single thing in the book, so you want to figure out what is important and get that into your brain. Number two, you want to retain that information for as long as you can and be able to use it later. And number three, you want to reduce your study time and the amount of time you have your nose stuck in the book. So to start improving in all of these areas, the first thing that I want you to think about is the why. Why are you doing this reading? Now, a lot of people would say you're reading to learn. And obviously, yes, that's the point of the education. But I think there's another more immediately practical reason that you're doing a reading, and that is how you're going to be assessed on that reading. Being a strategic reader means using different strategies for different reading purposes. And those purposes are defined by the assessments you're going to face in class, which lead back to your immediate goal of earning awesome grades. Now, most students tackle their reading assignments like zombies. They look at the reading assignment and they go, must run my eyes over X number of pages by tomorrow night. That's it. Don't be a reading zombie. Otherwise, your exams are going to turn into a chainsaw. Know what it is that your brain needs to pull out of the reading and focus on that. So here are 4 common reasons that you might do a textbook reading. Number 1, you're going to be facing down a multiple choice test. Number 2, you're going to have to do an essay, actually creating something from scratch in your own words. Number 3 is the evaluation of data in labs, which applies to more technical and scientific majors. And number 4 is the summarization of research for class presentations and reports. The type of assessment that you have to do will dictate what kind of information you need to pull out of your readings. For instance, if you're going to have to do a multiple choice test, then you're going to want to focus on the details of the reading assignments, taking smart, concise notes about all the little things in a class, and then turning those into questions that you can study rapid fire later on. But if you're in a class where you have to write essays, then thorough knowledge of the main ideas is more important, and you're going to want to focus more on summarization and making sure that you can communicate what you learned in your own words. So there's a tip from the video I did last week on figuring out whether or not you even need to do a reading assignment that applies perfectly here as well, and that is to gauge your classes. As the semester goes on, be mindful of what's in the syllabus and what your professor generally uses to assess you, and then apply that knowledge to your readings. Now, this will take practice, but as time goes on, you're going to find that this mindfulness really pays off in the time it saves you and the clarity it gives you when you're looking at your book. So once you've gauged those classes and figured out the type of information you want to pull from your reading, how do you actually go about doing that reading? Well, to start out, let me give you a universal tip that applies to any reading you do, and it's this. Don't read your textbooks like you read a newspaper. People who read the newspaper aren't reading to apply what they're learning. They're just reading to get the gist of the day's events. You're not reading for gists, you're reading for application. Also, don't expect that you're going to learn efficiently by just reading and rereading passages over and over again. The writer Virginia Volk said that how often you read something is immaterial. How you read it is crucial. Think of a book like an art museum. You can walk through the Met in New York 10 times, look at all the paintings each time you go through, and still know next to nothing about any of the art there. You might know the general layout, where certain pieces are, but if I ask you for details, which artist created this painting? Where was this dog thing sculpted? You won't have a clue. Books are really the same. Passively running your eyes over the pages is like casually strolling through an art museum and not actually studying any of the pieces. It's actually worse because the brain is better at remembering emotionally evocative pictures and imagery than it is at remembering squiggly, arbitrary lines on paper. So instead, try to read in the same way that you talk with a friend who challenges you intellectually. You listen eagerly, you contribute your own words to the conversation, and eventually both of you create information that comes together to make something new. This is called active reading, and it's crucial for being able to retain what you learn from your textbooks and be able to apply it later on. In my next video, I'm going to go over a framework of specific techniques that you can try out to start using active reading. But to round this video out, I want to leave you with a technique that you can use to create a small win in your studies. And here it is. Create 2 different habits for your textbook readings. The first one is going to focus on just getting you to read consistently. And the second one is going to focus on getting you to start using active reading instead of passive reading. So the first habit I think you should try out is reading daily. And this might mean planning ahead in advance what you're going to read for a certain week, and maybe even reading some outside material if you finish everything. But it's all about getting into the habit of reading every single day, making it a consistent effort. And for the second habit, try to write down a small amount of notes for each reading you do, or create a small summary for each reading. It doesn't have to be anything large, you just want to get into the habit of doing it and being more actively involved in your reading. Now, with both these habits, you can experiment with making them either input-based or output-based. Input-based habits have a fixed amount of effort that you have to put into them. So read for 15 minutes. That's only 15 minutes of effort and then you're done. On the flip side, output-based habits are based on making something concrete. So write 1 page of notes could be an output-based habit, and the amount of time and effort you need to put into it isn't fixed. Personally, I use both of these types of habits in my own reading. So for my actual reading habit, I use an input-based goal, read for 15 minutes every single day, and then once I've gotten into that, I usually read for longer and I start getting more engaged. And then I use an output-based goal, which is to write half a page of notes on what I'm reading to make sure that I'm actively learning. Whichever type you choose, it's also important to build a small reward into your habit. And getting good grades is a good reward, but it's something that's a little too far off to really count. So I would say find something else that rewards you for getting the reading done every single day. For me, that's ticking off a daily in Habit RPG, which I've made a little bit more valuable by creating a challenge in the College Info Geek Guild. And if you want to join that, you can go to the companion blog post for this video, which you'll find linked down in the description. Otherwise, you could do something else like watching an episode of your favorite show on Netflix, playing a video game, or something else fun. Just make sure that you're building this loop of, here's a cue to do my reading, I'm going to do the reading and take the notes, and then give myself a small reward to reinforce the positive feeling I get from doing that reading. So that's it for this video. If you want to get my tips on active reading, which will come in the next video, then make sure you subscribe to this channel and you'll get those right when they come out. Otherwise, I will see you in that next video.
Okay, so that's an introduction to what we're going to be talking about today, and I just want to give a quick disclaimer. So our goal, Larissa and I, is not that you guys would rush through your assignments so you have more time to watch TV and play video games, but rather that you would have more time to work on your other courses, your relationships, your discipleships, your ministry. So yeah, just want to throw that in there. So active reading simply means reading something with the determination to understand, evaluate it for its relevance to your needs. So simply rereading and rereading, as Thomas said, being a reading zombie, is not an effective way to understand and learn. What you want to do is actively and critically engage with the content that will help you to learn more quickly and save you time. All right, please raise your hand to answer my question. When was the last time you learned how to read? Anybody? How old were you? When was the last time you learned how to read? 1992? In Gail's Greek class? All right, well, the first time you learned how to read, you were in grade school. So you probably learned to read something like this. Jane saw Sam run. Jane saw Sam jump. You probably learned to read word for word and line for line. But your brain can actually read a lot faster than you probably think it can. Right now, many of you are probably reading about the speed that you can talk. But your brain can go a lot faster. So part of active reading is challenging yourself to allow your brain to take in more content in less amount of time and pushing yourself to read faster and faster. And we're going to do a quick exercise on the next slide that's going to illustrate this, that your brain can really make sense of the information without actually taking in all of the information. So, in the next slide, please see if you can make sense of this paragraph. Did everyone kind of get through it? And your brain can figure it out. It's amazing. So when you're reading, I would challenge yourself to try to read faster. Push yourself to move down the page, look Look at sentences, look for main points, keywords, and try to take in the information.
All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the syllabus for a couple of your different classes that most of you either are in or will need to take if you desire to graduate from the Bible College. So the most important thing to do when you first start the class is to read your syllabus, to sit down and look over how am I being assessed? Where is my grade mainly stationed on? So for reading, you want to take a look at what percentage of my grade is my reading? And how does that compare to other percentages like papers, tests? So I've got church history up here is one of them. Reading is 40% of your grade in church history. I believe he says somewhere in here that you're tested over your reading, although I've heard him from my mother that he said in class that you're not actually tested over your reading. So you'll have to double check with him. But being tested over your reading is going to mean you're going to need to read this in more detail. You're going to actually need to spend time. You're going to need to look over for the little details that he can pull out and test you on. And also 40% of your grade, if you don't do your reading, you're not going to pass the class. So you have to do it. It's not one of those optional, oh, this is only 2% of my grade. This is 40% of your grade. It's significant. You have to do your reading. The other syllabus that I have here is Gail's Doctrine of Scripture and God class. And reading on here is 25% of your grade. And then you've got reaction papers and discussion, which is another 15% of your grade. That's also a significant portion of your grade divided up slightly differently in actually doing the reading and then how you're assessed on the reading in discussions and reaction papers. So you're going to have to know the reading well enough to be able to form sentences and ideas off of it. And Gail will give you a lot of help in the beginning of his syllabus here, reading through your first couple readings. He puts in brackets, read for familiarity. And then there's different readings. So reading for familiarity is the same as what I would say is reading for comprehension. So those are the two things that I'm going to say. We'll use them interchangeably. So Gail says read for familiarity. I'm going to say read for comprehension. It means the same thing. So this is more like skim reading. You're probably not going to read every word and you're not going to read every sentence. You're looking for main points, big ideas. You need to be familiar with what you're reading, but you're probably not tested over the information. They're looking to make sure that you've been exposed to it, that you have a knowledge of what is out there. So you're going to need to read titles, headings, bolds, italics, first and last sentences, introduction, paragraphs, and conclusion paragraphs. You need to be able to summarize what the author has said. So a good question to ask yourself for this one is, do you understand? And then just a way to kind of test yourself on it is you should be reading about 40 pages in an hour. So that's about 2 Erickson chapters in an hour. So some of you can pick it up there a little bit. You're laughing. I know what this means. The second one is reading for mastery. This is something where you're going to need to know your reading inside and out. You're probably tested over details. You need to know this material. You need to be able to discuss this material knowledgeably. You need to know main points and big ideas, and you also need to know the details that support them. What arguments did the author use to support this wild idea? You probably should be reading every sentence, but you don't need to read every word. Like she was saying, your brain takes in more information than you think it does. You don't need to read every word. But you also, for this one, you need to be able to accurately articulate what the author has said. So a good question to ask yourself on this one is, can you teach this to somebody else, or can you have a good discussion with somebody else about this reading? And then for another test on yourself, you should be reading about 20 pages an hour, which is about 1 Erickson chapter in an hour.
Okay, so while you're reading, how can you engage your mind? Does it make sense to just sit, okay, I've read the same paragraph 3 times and I still have no idea what it says? So what you wanted to do is, as Larissa said, you're going to look for valuable information. Portions you don't understand, okay, that's significant. Ideas that cause you to feel an emotion. Are you mad about that reading? Are you sad? Are you moved? Ideas that are thought-provoking, statements you disagree with, anything that kind of causes a reaction at you, definitely take note of. And while you're reading, it's really helpful to do some kind of an activity to help your reading stick. So a lot of people will like to mark up their books. So highlighting, underlining. If it's your own book and you're okay with marking it up, writing, ideas or questions in the margins, starring key points, writing down main ideas, details. Also, if you're using a library book, you can't mark it up. You can use these little tags to mark like, oh, this is a page I want to come back to, or this is like the author's main point, or I want to use this quote in a paper later. So definitely, and as you're reading, if you have an idea or something that like, oh, I want to know more about that, or I don't really understand this point, it could, bring up what's going to be a research project for you later in the semester. So you definitely want to be marking where you're finding this information so you can come back to it. Some people do not really like to take notes or do anything else while they're reading. They just like to read. So if you're that kind of person, I would suggest after you're done with your reading, write a quick summary of what the main points were. Write down comments or questions you have that you can, use in a class discussion. It also really helps to do these materials or these activities so you don't have to go back and reread the material. Do you have a question?
Yeah, when you said following or reading, do you mean like following a 15-minute section of reading, or like reading the whole book and then write a short summary?
Well, it just depends on, I would not say a whole book. I would say like a reading for a class per week. So if you have like a chapter to read, you get done with that chapter, keep it while it's fresh in your mind. Just jot down a few of the main points and then ideas, questions, comments that you have. I'm going to show you guys what I do. I have to read a ton for my courses. So every time before I do a reading, I print out a blank. I call it my reading response sheet, where I can write down what week of class I am, the title of my reading author, and then I have a section I fill in the main ideas, and sometimes I pop to the back, and then thoughts and questions that I can apply to some discussion. And you guys can look at these. I'll pass these around. Another important thing I try to include is page numbers. So if I want to come back to a certain section of the article or whatever it is I'm reading, I don't have to dig through and find. I can just quickly jump to that page and refresh it for myself. So I would whatever works for you basically, just something to do, an activity to make your reading really stick in your mind and that can help you to have fresh recall when you need to go back to that material instead of having to reread it. Okay, another really good option that you can do, and so nice you all live in close proximity, we have such a great community here, is discuss with your spouse or your friends. And that is also really going to help the reading stick in your mind and the information to solidify. Your professor would be also happy to talk to you, or everyone in this room has to meet with a discipler once a week. So if you have questions that have come up from one of your readings, bring that up with your discipler and say, hey, can we talk about this? Or this was really interesting to me. They would love to discuss it with you. So I'm going to hand it back over to Larissa.
So I know this is why you all took it. How do you actually read a book? Well, the first thing, like we've kind of been saying, is you need to know why you're reading this book. Are you picking this book up for fun? Are you writing a research paper on it? Is it required reading for class? Do you need to do, what needs to be done? And that'll help you decide how you need to read this. So this is Let the Nations Be Glad. It's one of your class textbooks for missions perspectives, I believe. And first thing you want to do is you want to read the title. And it's also helpful then to go to the back of the book and look over what's a summary of this book. What's it about? And then, or sometimes they have endorsements on the back too. So who recommends this book? Is this a good resource? Is this something that's useful for writing a paper on, if that's what you're looking for? The next thing you want to look at, especially if you're writing a research paper and you want to use this, is the table of contents. Because you want to look through here and say, is there a chapter related to what I want to talk about? Is this specific enough? Does it answer my question? Is it too general? Do I already know everything that's in this book? Is it too specific and there's more information than I'm going to be able to use and summarize succinctly? So those are good questions to ask yourself. And then as you're reading through it, you're going to want to read titles. And you're going to want to read introductory paragraphs. So the first paragraph of a chapter is going to tell you what the chapter is about. And then you're also going to want to read headings. They'll tell you what's coming next and where we're going and if this is related to you. So another thing you want to do with your reading books is you want to look for any time that they say in summary or in conclusion or there are 3 points to this whatever. You want to look for any time they mention a number that's probably going to be followed by, okay, main point number 1, main point number 2, main point, and it's really easy then to go through and either write those down real quick or to highlight them and just be like, and then coming back, it's really easy to be like, oh, now what were his main points? Oh yeah, they're right there. So a lot of that is very similar when you come to a more traditional textbook. That's a little bit heftier, it's a little bit deeper in some ways and shallower in other ways. It's broader in a lot of ways, and textbooks can be just dry and hard to read. And so knowing how to read a textbook well and knowing that you don't have to read every single line of every single page is really helpful. And you can always spend more time reading what's interesting to you. Like if you stop here and you're like, oh, I need to get this done, but this is really interesting, read it. If it's really interesting, or mark it and then come back to it if it's interesting to you. So textbooks are also really good. Oftentimes they have indexes in the back. So if you wanted to do a research paper on Io, which is one of Jupiter's moons, you'd come back here and be like, oh, where is that? And you'd find, oh, it only has a couple of pages on Io. Maybe I should find a different resource. This isn't going to be enough information. So indexes help you a lot too. Oftentimes they'll have glossaries in the back if you have definitions that you need to learn to repeat on a paper or give in a paper. They'll have definitions in the back. And sometimes they'll have chapter outlines or chapter summaries that can be really helpful to be like, oh, what was this chapter on? And just jog your memory a little bit. And then textbooks are also really good. They'll have a lot of bold words and a lot of italicized words. Those are things that are important to read in your reading. No matter what you're reading, you want to read the bold and the italics because the author has taken a special time to say, this is important. So I marked a page in here that does a couple of different things. So the sentence is, basically a telescope does 3 things. So there's a number. You want to pay attention to that number. Oh, there's 3 things coming after this that tell me what this telescope is going to do. So the first one, it says a telescope magnifies. Magnifies is in italics. That tells you, oh, this word is important. What comes next is it's going to tell you what magnifies mean. It makes little things look big. And then 2, a telescope resolves, and that one's also in italics. So it makes fuzzy things look sharp and clear. And so it's a really succinct way of going through and saying, oh, this is what's important. This is what I need to remember. It's just 1, 2, 3, really simple and easy.
Okay, so lastly, how to read an article. And I don't know how many articles you come across. If you're in some of the higher level classes, you will have to read more articles for class and for research purposes. I have to read a ton of articles, and actually I don't read articles. I don't read them. When you come to an article, first you're wanting to come to it and assess how much time do I want to invest in this article. You want to use different parts of the article to kind of inform you on how much time this article needs. So especially if it's assigned for class, you might have to read a little more thoroughly, a little more depthly. But if you're just doing research, before you read through the whole article, you're going to want to say, does this fit with my topic or not? What's this talking about? So an article has parts just like a book. Okay, I brought some of my articles as an example. So the very first bolded part you see on an article is the abstract, which is like a cheat sheet for what the article is exactly about. I always thoroughly read the abstract. And then I skip to the very back of the article and I read the conclusion. I solidly read the conclusion because those two things, like I said, they're a good cheat sheet, they're a good summary of what the whole article is talking about. Then from there, if I decide that, okay, this article is worth my time, this article is interesting or it fits, then I go into, okay, I'm going to read through the introduction of it. I'm going to skim through the introduction. I'm going to get some of the author's main points, his main terms, and then moving on through the body. I kind of, for me, it might be different for your classes, but for my classes, I don't read the body much at all. I kind of flip through it, reading headings and looking for terms, looking at the charts, trying to get a grasp for what he's saying. And then when I hit the point where it says, okay, this is in summary, this is my conclusion, in summary, or this is wrapping up my findings, discussion, or summary, then I'm reading that a little bit more thoroughly again until I hit the conclusion, and then I read that. So I normally do not read an article word for word if I don't have to. I've been able to read about a 20 to 30 page technical article in about 20 to 30 minutes, and maybe a little bit longer if I'm taking notes or, like Larissa said, if it's interesting or applies. And from that, I know enough information about, okay, this is generally what the author is talking about. This is what his study was, to apply it to my homework or to the discussion that I'm doing with the other students, So, so that is our conclusion. So in conclusion, if you would like to read actively, you should read as if you're participating in an intellectual conversation with a friend. You should be asking questions of the material, debating back and forth what you agree with and disagree with, and adding your own thoughts and ideas. So we'll give a second for some question and answer, but really quick, I know I don't have enough handouts, so I'll print out some handouts and have them on Tasha's desk tomorrow or later this week if you want to grab one. And for those of you who came in late and didn't catch the whole video, on the handout is the title of the video, YouTube. It's College Info Geek, and how to effectively read your textbooks. So are there any questions or for us? Yeah.
With John Piper books, could you just read the first chapter and the last chapter?
Did you actually read the book then, though? Depending on how much of this is your grade, you might want to actually read. And like Gail requires percentages. How much of this did you actually read? First and last chapter is only 10% of the book.
Yeah.
You probably want to read more than just the first and last chapter.
Just read faster in the middle.
Yeah.
That's a question too. On those percentages, what do you guys feel go for mastery if it's a percentage thing? Is that what you would read? Because you might not be reading every word, but you're getting all the concepts and able to even teach them back to someone else. So therefore, you've read the book.
I would say for the professor, like Gail, on his syllabus, he says which way he's wanting you to read. For the professor that doesn't, like I know Ryan wants you to read everything. So then you just need to determine, well, okay, I need to prioritize. I have 3 hours, I have this much reading to do, and this much of it is Ryan's, and how are you going to accomplish that reading? So I would just say you either need to talk to your professor about, okay, I have this, you've assigned this reading, what are you really wanting to get from that? Or like Larissa said, what are you doing with that reading? Are you going to write a paper? Okay, so you need the main ideas, and you need to be able to think critically about that. Are you doing a test? Okay, so you need details and dates and people and places. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much. I guess ethically in the academic field, what is you've read 100% of the book?
I think that's a little harder for our environment because, so I know some of you have to sign off that you read. So use integrity. If you can read and understand the material, you read it a little faster, but if you're understanding and you want to sign off, I would just say that's between you and you and God, but I mean,
And ask your professor too.
yeah, what's acceptable?
What's acceptable? Ask Gail. He'll tell you. He's been through enough schooling that he knows how much time you have and he knows how to read well. And he'll tell you, okay, you don't have to read every word, or this is how I would read this if I were you.
Yeah. Any other questions for us? All right, well, I hope you all do really well this semester and are able to tackle your reading and learn all your information you need to. And just please, if any of you ever need help with paper or any assignment, we would love to help you. So thank you for coming.